Hello.
Hello.
All right, great. I'm glad you can hear me. All right, and so let me get down the names. All right, and we'll get we'll get going. So what we're doing today, we're doing Spanish colonization, and what happens with this theme, what's happened for the longest time, is they use the Spanish as an anti-model against what we believe in today. So we believe in tolerance and peaceful coexistence of peoples, equality, egalitarianism, people being on equal footing, democratic government. And the Spanish seem to employ little, if any, of those things. And so what the Spanish contend in the early modern era and later is that they have been conveniently vilified very conveniently by the English and the Dutch and the French, but especially the English and the Dutch, who were their Protestant enemies. And of course, so that they could say, right, that our colonization constitutes a lesser evil than that of Spain. So the Spanish call it a black legend, that it's a dirty, dark lie. And of course, why something bad has to be black is a whole other can of worms we'll get into. But that's what I mean when I use the terms interchangeably, Spanish colonization and the black legend. So that's the type of discourse that I chose to tackle on this topic is just that, them being labeled in a negative manner. And that it's not as if you don't have things to go off of. So for instance, like with you see their viceroyalties here in the Americas. As you learned in school, the Spanish, they hired a mercenary, Cristobal Colon or Christopher Columbus. After him, and he'll have 4 famous trips in the Caribbean and into onto the southern, the isthmus there of the Central American countries and the top of South America. And then by 1502, the Spaniards are putting their administration into effect in the Caribbean. By 1521, they took Mexico. 1535, they took Peru and the Inca Empire. By the 1590s, they were coming into New Mexico. By the 1560s, they had established Florida. And as early as 1540, they claimed California, Upper California, as opposed to Baja California. And so with this, right, in the narrative is, when you do great man history, when you study people in power, Ferdinand and Isabella had a precarious rule over their provinces in Spain, and they were trying to unify Spain together. And so Ferdinand was in Aragon, Isabella was in Castile, and they both had claimants to their throne, and they both had uprisings that they had to put down. So what became convenient is to say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and give our blessings to discoveries and what they called, it was called being an adelantado, like going adelante, going forward and claiming new lands. And the only criterion that was set up was by the Pope, because church and state were combined, right? And the Pope gave his blessings to pagan lands, to non-Christian lands that they could go and grab. And so this rat race, if you will, began in earnest in the 1400s in Indonesia, India, and in Asia, basically. And so they would encourage people to risk their own lives, risk their own fortunes, to go and claim forward new land in the name of their crown and their country. And in return, they would promise them riches, they would promise them nobility and privileges that came with that, etc. And so it was kind of the opening of capitalism, because in the early modern era, the European countries technically were mercantilist, where the crowns decided to whom economic opportunities would be given and how wealth and opportunities would be allocated. Now they're starting to open it up. So it's kind of a brutal early form of capitalism where they're encouraging people to go forward and conquer new pagan lands. Well, in Spain, there was kind of a theme that developed, or not a theme, but just a tradition of men who could aspire to hidalgo status, Hidalgo, and that was a lower noble who had earned his or her stripes. Most of the time, it was in battle, and so they were fighting, which is unique to Spain, the reconquest of Spain against the Caliphate of North Africa, the Umayyad Caliphate. And so it's not a neat chronological demarcation, because they were fighting off and on from the very time that the Muslims took over Spain in 711. They called it Al-Andalus. And so, but by the time of the 1400s, that line of the Umayyad Caliphate's control over Spain had gone down greatly, down to Andalusia, down to the bottom of Spain, where they still had to conquer Granada and Cordoba, where the caliphate was centered. And so as they were fighting, what happened is a lot of men who were second sons to hidalgos, who got to see their fathers fight the Muslims in their homeland and win hidalgo status. And then they had primogenitor. It was called mayorazgo in Spanish. That everything went to the hijo mayor, to the eldest son. And so what do you know? The second sons had nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and everything to gain by trying to follow their father's footsteps and conquering new lands. So a lot of them came with the famous Cortez expedition and others that came into the New World to claim new lands. And just they developed a kind of a rebellious, greedy reputation. You look at the diaries that were held by about 4 different gentlemen in the Columbus ventures, and according to all 4 of them, the men were very rebellious and very apt and eager to enrich themselves and claim new land. They got in trouble with Columbus with taking off against his will, absconding with ships, going to other and new islands, looking for gold, etc. And matter of fact, that started a war with a Taino on the island of Puerto Rico. And so, so the Spanish, right from the get-go, you could find evidence to vilify them, that they had nothing but greedy second sons of hidalgos coming here, ready to pillage and conquer, and they would be rewarded for it. And then the Pope, actually, Alexander VI, gave his blessing to this and said that they had one caveat, is they were to convert the natives that they conquered. And so, but the thing is that according to the Patronato, that the methods used to convert the natives were left up to the discretion of the Spanish crown. And really it was Isabella, because Castile was more powerful than Aragon. And so with Isabella, she did show signs of a little, by today's standards, of being a little bit religiously fanatical. And so she tried to start a new crusade into North Africa, into Muslim North Africa, but not much came of that. She ordered that, she gave her blessing to the requerimiento. And the requirement was you could go up to a pagan people and give them a 24-hour ultimatum to accept the Catholic Church and the Christian faith, or else that you would face holy war. And so they did that in New Mexico. They did that in South America. They did it in multiple areas of the Americas. That type of, by today's standards, kind of brutal method of converting the natives. And then also the first couple generations were granted the right of encomiendas. And encomienda was, you were granted, right, the serfdom-like status of the natives that you conquered. So they had to work for you, and you didn't have to pay them. And so it was a form of servitude for sure. And it was so controversial that it only lasted to Charles V of Spain. And he put an end to the encomienda system. But there were in South Africa or South America, they fought to keep it alive a little bit longer. And it rears its ugly head in history books. Then in addition to that, you have how undemocratic the establishment was that they put into the Americas. As you see here, you had a virrey, a viceroy, basically a vice king. And he or she had the power of executing the laws of the land. And of course, the laws were made by a group of just 5 men, a royal council back in Madrid. And so 5 men are making the laws. And of course, they were amenable to the laws of Castile. But they were given the power to change the laws a little bit to adapt to the American environment. So at any rate, a 5-man committee makes the Constitution for the Americas. 1 man has power of executing them in each viceroyalty. Then you have handpicked judges known as the Audiencia, and they were handpicked, well-connected Spaniards, well-educated, who do what judges do. They adjudicate or referee disputes, decide on guilt or innocence in criminal trials, etc. But of course, they were not democratically elected. Then you had governors. They were handpicked over smaller regions. And then they did grant the right of city councils, that where in multiple places, Native Americans had already practiced something akin to that. They were called cabildos. But the thing is they also had an alcalde mayor, from where we get the term mayor. But they had a hated group of people, of Spaniards, known as the corregidores, like the verb corregir, meaning to correct in Spanish. They would come to the city councils. They could overturn their decisions. They could require labor of the people, especially the natives. And then that's another thing, is the gentleman used the term pigmentocracy in the 1970s because the Spanish kind of had a hierarchy based upon the pigment of their skin. At one given point, you could not come into Acapulco and the major, in Veracruz and the major ports of entry without showing certificates of whiteness. I kid you not, being a quote, pure Spaniard. And you look at Spain's history, and that's a bit of a joke, because Spain has had Greeks, Celtics, Romans, Carthaginians, Berbers, Arabs, all kinds of different ethnic groups and nationalities that have come and conquered or just come and lived with them, amongst them. But nevertheless, you have these papers to show your, they called it limpieza de sangre, your cleanness of blood. And so what do you know? Viceroys, governors, the judges of the Audiencia, the corregidores, they were almost always light-skinned Spaniards who had the opportunities to acquire those jobs. So for those reasons and others, you look, and then not to mention, you just see the conflict that they had here in the US, for instance. In 1539, Hernando de Soto established a horrendous reputation amongst the natives for his treatment of them, trying to what's the word I'm thinking of, when you extort. He tried extortion and violence, etc. You look at Don Juan de Oñate in New Mexico, and he was ruthless with the Native Americans. He was so corrupt and developed a reputation for such ruthlessness in Spanish New Mexico that he was arrested and brought back to Spain in chains for abuse of power. And then, of course, you have the famous conquistadores from 1519 to 1521. You could look at Castillo's book called just The Conquest of Spain, or of New Spain, of Mexico. It's a fascinating book, but it's riddled with deceit, conflict, violence, fear, distrust, etc. And then, of course, for a while, you had an exception with California, right? Because of the famous Sacred Expedition of 1769. Junipero Serra and Francisco Palau and these other priests and friars established 21 missions up the coast of California. And the first initial histories of them were hagiographies. That's literally a biography that's trying to promote someone to sainthood. So, of course, they were one-sided, and they showed how wonderful the Spaniards were. But they had their facts. That they had some facts, that have not been completely disputed to this day. And then later historiography, or the writing of history, especially after Karl Marx in the mid 1800s, is people have taken more of a Marxist look at it and more of a pluralistic look at it, and say that the Spaniards were guilty of cultural genocide, that they forced the Native Americans to deny their own culture, their own worldview. They imposed the Spanish worldview, culture, norms, etc., on the natives. So so you have all of that. Notice the areas claimed by Spain in the Americas, everywhere but the Northeast, right? So you have a question of that on test one, but yeah, virtually everywhere but the Northeast. So nowhere near, Massachusetts, New York, etc. But all throughout the South and the West of the U.S., Spain as a colonizer claimed such land, the Louisiana Territory, etc., prior to England. All right. And so, so when you look at that, now let's take a look at the assignment. All right. So number one, Columbus's world. All right. And oftentimes I give much away on the thesis with the title, but obviously I didn't in this one. But look at the last sentence, or what I have in parentheses. Did I let him off the hook too easily? So that gives you a big hint of my thesis, right? And by the way, please remember, there is something pertinent to a test question on every single section, virtually of every assignment. So please read all of them, okay? Even though you're only analyzing and evaluating one of your choosing. So at any rate, with number one, I try to make it, I try to suggest that Columbus had his back against the wall, that he was mired in poverty, that his family was stuck there, that there weren't many opportunities to rise and to extricate themselves from that poverty. And he did what he had to do. You had these merchants, right? And the term bank in English comes from the Italian word for bench, because oftentimes these merchants in the early modern era would set up their benches in the town square on certain days, certain times of the year, and they would ask, kind of like the Shark Tank show or something of that sort, one at a time, why do I want to lend my money to you? What can you do with my money? And I say on number one, and please remember, I write this tongue in cheek. This is not, each section I write does not necessarily reflect what I personally believe. It's something that I thought was a thought-provoking, interesting thesis from a book that I had read or a professor I had sat under. Okay, so keep that in mind. So at any rate, according to number one, Columbus learns that he has to play the game, that the correct answer to that question to the merchants, is I'll do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Columbus did. So he went to the Ivory Coast and he bought and sold slaves. He went to Chios and these other islands and fought to take them over and killed people in combat. He tried to take over some elements of the Spice Islands, the Moluccas Islands in Indonesia. And then ultimately, right, he has a very callous letter that he writes back to Ferdinand, to whom he owes money, by the way, and asks Ferdinand, what would you like? Would you like slaves? Do you want me to capture some of them and bring them back to you? Some of the natives here? Let me know and I'll do it. So I am going so far as to number one is suggesting that poor Columbus didn't perceive himself to have much of a choice. If he wanted to get his family out of poverty, he needed to play the game. He had to become ruthless. By all means, I invite you to disagree with that. But notice there are two parts to every write-up that you do. The first part, what the thesis is, an example or two of how it's defended. There is a definitive answer that I'm looking for on each number. So you can, quote, get these wrong. But the second part is your evaluation. Why you do or do not believe it to be credible, that's completely up to you. That's much more subjective. All right. So number two, I have it here, Spain enslaved by the prejudices of her time. And that is a very telling, indicative title. It's just that. Is on this one, I try to show how fighting in the name of God was all the Spaniards knew in the 1600s, 1400s. That was the norm. It was the norm throughout Europe. It was the norm in other places as well. It was centuries ago. I mentioned things like the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, classical liberalism. None of those have been introduced to the world yet. All right. And so notice, again, this is kind of in defense of the Spanish. Contending, right? Absolutely. By today's standards, they were very ethnocentric. They put their culture, their worldview, right, their ethnicity at the center of the universe. But they didn't know any better, supposedly, to number two, right? And so see how well or how poorly I defend that argument, that they were products of their time, products of their environment. So feel free to disagree with that. Then number three is the least argumentative of all of them. I understand that it's very factually based and much more simply informative. But again, as the very first sentence conveys, that's the simple thesis intended. 16th through 18th century Spain deserves to serve as an anti-model for today's insistence upon egalitarianism, everyone on equal footing, equality of opportunity economically, and democratic government. So it's that simple of a thesis on number three, is I try to convey a very backward, very undemocratic Spanish American society. And I gave some of the stuff up on that already about the different offices being non-elective. Notice also on this, the consulado. The consulado decided who received economic opportunities to trade in the most lucrative products. So you had to have the proper papers to do so. And there, sadly, is an actual chart of their pigmentocracy as far as deciding to whom to allocate opportunities for advancement, economic opportunities, etc. They actually made a chart. So you see there, it's difficult to read. Español, Spaniard, con indio, or con India, right, with a Native American. So they said it's a mestizo. And then a mestizo with one Native American parent, one Spanish parent, with a Spaniard was a castizo. So that person's moving his or her way up back towards Spaniard. A castizo with a Spaniard is now considered again a Spaniard. It's crazy. So they actually had a chart. And you could merit gracias al sacar notes. A note, thank you for getting me out. If you like saved a nobleman's child from drowning or something, you could have a paper that you can carry with you to be treated as a Spaniard, even if you were not physiologically clearly apparent to be a Spaniard. And then number 4, the title gives it away again. Spanish missions were a proverbial mixed bag. So at first, I began with court history. Court history is when an emperor asks a scribe to write a history of his or her kingdom. That scribe, right, is going to select facts, going to omit facts, going to interpret facts and present them in such a way as to make that emperor look great, right? So that's what court history does. Praises the winners. So at first, that's where I start off with. I give the benefit of the doubt to the Spaniards, particularly to their clergy, right? To their priests and friars, of genuinely wanting to save the souls of the Native Americans on the missions. Then I talk about how they helped equip them for a more modern economic system, teaching them skills, connecting them to trade, right? But then I start taking a 180 and say, well, some would contend that teaching them skills, etc., that there was a utilitarian purpose behind it, that the Spanish were trying to take advantage of Native American labor, right? Then I bring in the fact of agency amongst the Native Americans, right? That they're not just passive victims or recipients in history. They were human agents who made decisions, who made differences in the historical narrative. So I gave some examples of such. And then I show evidence in Children of Coyote, this story of the missions in California, of harm that was inflicted upon they were called neophytes, the Native American converts on the missions. Some of the harm was deliberate. And then other components to the harm were indirect. They were inadvertent. The Spaniards didn't mean. I've never come across evidence of the Spanish literally trying to give them measles or influenza. But it happened nevertheless. Destruction of their ecosystem, etc. All right, so I'd like you to please read all of this and choose one. Just simply choose one to analyze and evaluate. And please remember that the sample that I had used on the first assignment doesn't have to be that long. My sample response, I'm not even sure, was quite half a page, but I try to get right to the point, right? Showing that I had discerned what the thesis was, gave an example or two of how that thesis was defended, and then gave my evaluation as to why I thought it was limited and how persuasive it was. All right, so does anyone have any questions about any of this?
I have a quick question, Professor.
Sure.
So our tests are going to be based off of these assignments, correct?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what I could do, Janet, is what I do from time to time is I'm fine with posting just as a file the test itself to let you guys get an early look at it. And you could see, okay, I see, he's asking this from this assignment, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. All right, anyone else?
Is that something that you'd be posting in the modules or?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah,
Great.
I try to keep everything as simple as possible, not just for you, but for me as well, because I'm not the most
Absolutely.
computer savvy instructor. And so absolutely, I would be happy to post it right on modules for you to
Awesome.
see.
Thank you.
No problem. Right, anyone else?
Is
I have
there
a
a time?
question. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
At the same time. Well, you can go first. I'll wait.
Okay, thank you. Is there a time slot with the test, like a time frame?
No, I mean, it has a due date as far as the day, just like any assignment, but I deliberately do not put any limits on the time. Now, I would imagine taking it on Canvas that you could, walk away and after a certain time, it might default and stop. So be careful of that. But I myself put no time limits on the test. I never have. I adamantly believe in that and giving you as much time as possible.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. And also, I have no way of enforcing it if I didn't want to, but I also am not averse to you guys using notes and taking the test. So so many of the answers that almost without exception, the answers to the questions are found in these argumentative assignments, especially not using a textbook. So I derive them from this, and then every now and then something may not be on there, and I should have covered it in a Zoom lecture. Anyone else?
Actually,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Please try again. Yeah, I'm sorry. My grandpa in the back. I was so like pretty much for the assignment, we just analyze and evaluate of what. Can you restate like what we have to do in the assignment one more time, please?
Yes. So you pick one, right?
Right.
And you just say in a couple sentences what the main idea of that section was.
Okay.
The writer in section number 2 contends that lotta, right? And then you say he or she defends it with facts such as, and give me an example of an argument or a fact used to support that main argument. And then you say, I believe this thesis, to be limitedly credible because it doesn't cite more sources, or it doesn't address this part of the argument, or whatever it might be. And my sample to you was a half a page or less, so it doesn't have to be that long. But yeah, you just show me that because it's not much different from a summary, the analysis part. Show me that you discern the main argument from that section. Okay, and then tell me why you do or do not believe it to be credible.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I was just making sure, Professor. Thank you.
No,
so
no
much.
problem. That's what I'm here for.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, anybody else?
The PowerPoint that you used today, are those
Yes.
available on the modules so we can go back and review if we need to?
Sure, absolutely. I'll be happy to put the PowerPoint up there.
That would be great.
Yeah, I should have thought of that. But absolutely, I'll make a note of that to post the PowerPoint.
And if you're going to be using PowerPoints in the future too, that would be great if we could access those as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'll be happy to do that. All right. All right. Any other questions?
One last question. Would
Sure.
things from the PowerPoint or facts be used for the test or just specifically the assignment?
You know what? Really, it's, to me, the PowerPoint is like the textbook. How I use the textbook is I just really firmly believe in what I do and making it argumentative. And so the textbook is a lot more dry, and it just tells you what happened and when, etc. So the textbook to me just gives you context. It gives you the surrounding situation. And that's exactly how I look at my PowerPoints. And that's how I tried to use it today when I showed the PowerPoint in this Zoom lecture, is that it's not really tied to any answers on your assignments. I'm not even sure how, I think it does happen to have answers to a couple test questions, but mainly that's not its purpose to me. I want to give you context with it so that you could feel better, like, oh, I see, the Spanish did this and then that, and then, okay. And it just makes you just better informed about the topic.
Got it. Yeah, it does tie it together, because I looked at the PowerPoint video for this number 2 assignment, and it goes with what we're reading.
Good, good, good. That makes me happy. So yeah, all the more reason why I will post it as soon as I can.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And I'll be happy to do that. I don't know why I hadn't thought about that, because I have PowerPoints to virtually every assignment. So I'll continue to do that. I'll put PowerPoints up for you to peruse. Okay. Right. So are you guys ready? Do you feel adequately equipped to tackle this assignment? Any thumbs up?
I don't know how to do that, but yes, I feel ready.
Okay. Thank you. I'll take that.
I do as well, and I agree with I don't know who that was that said I can't find the thumbs up either on my laptop.
No problem. Thank you though. All right.
Um,
So
I don't know if you guys can see on the bottom of your screen, but there's a little reactions. It says reactions, and then it has like a little emoji. That's how you can access those thumbs ups and question marks and all that stuff.
there you go. I see it.
I saw it. Thank
Thank you
you.
for your help.
Thank you as well. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I know myself, when I started grad school, I was intimidated and so forth, and I wouldn't have on a Zoom meeting spoken up, even if I had a question, unfortunately. So that's why I ask, for those of you who have every right to stay silent every now and then, if I could just get confirmation with a thumbs up that you feel adequately prepared to tackle the assignment. All right. Well, thank you guys. You will receive your extra credit, all right, on assignment number 2. I really appreciate your attendance. I'd like to encourage you, please continue to do this. And you guys go get it, okay?
Thank you. Have a good week.
You as well. Thank you. You guys have a nice one, okay?
Thank you, Professor. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Have a good
Thank-
weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.